Hi, it's Carrie Kenner, and welcome to the weekly vlog. So, last week I was talking about decision making and how it's not the rational, linear, research based left brain process that we often think it is, that it's actually controlled by the emotional parts of our brain and has a lot to do with our deep seated memories and ideas and beliefs about things. And I also talked about how I wish there was a lot more skill training or sharing that was available to people, especially at a young age, so that we knew what was going on inside our brains when we are making decisions and choices about what to do in life. So this week, I want to talk about the models and tools that are often used in decision making, primarily in the context of healthcare, and for me, especially in the context of birth in healthcare. So, I want to talk about two models today. One is a model that is often taught to patients or clients, and the other is a model that is used by healthcare providers. So, the model that is kind of most well known is called the BRAIN model, BRAIN. It's an acronym for 5 questions that need to be asked when one is making a decision. Those questions are benefits, risks, alternatives, intuition, and nothing. So let's go through those in a little bit more detail. Benefits. What's the benefit of the treatment that is being recommended in a healthcare setting? And it might be that it's going to fix something or remove a symptom or do something that's going to help somebody with a medical condition. R is for risks. So everything has a benefit, hopefully, and everything has a risk. And don't let people tell you that anything is risk free because that doesn't exist. So everything has a potential risk. Our job is to weigh the benefits and the risks. A is for alternatives. And those are what are the other things besides what's being recommended that could be used to address or treat the same symptom, situation, or condition. I is for intuition. Now, intuition is usually not factored into medical care. In fact, it's usually ignored or not even believed in. But the reality is that our bodies actually know a lot about what they need. And if we can tap into that intuition and ask our bodies what's resonating with them, they can often give us really good information about what to do next. The trick is that intuition is not understood, it's not researched, there's not a lot of evidence about it, but that doesn't mean that it isn't valuable because it is. And then we've got N for either nothing or not now. What if we don't do anything immediately? What if we don't do anything for an hour or a day or a month? Or what if we just choose to do nothing at all? Then what might happen? So, when we're using a model like this, we can teach it outside of an actual setting. So, for example, I used to teach this to people in my childbirth classes, or I would teach it to my doula clients in a prenatal visit. And the thing is that when we're talking about it in general, it's a great tool to learn, but it really can't be used effectively until there's an actual situation that we're faced with. For example, if somebody has a situation that is urgent and is very dangerous, then the benefits are going to mean more and the risks are going to mean less if there's something really important that needs to be taken care of now. But if I'm sitting in the living room talking to somebody about what if this happens in labor, they're like, it's not happening, or it doesn't seem that serious. And so in that situation, the benefits might seem less and the risks seem like a higher risk to take. So we want to be able to use a real life situation to weigh the benefits and risks against. So that's the brain model. Then there's the share model. And this is a model that healthcare providers are taught to learn how to make collaborative decisions with their patients. So the S stands for seek the participation of the patient. So they're inviting the client in to make this decision together, that it's not just the doctor's expertise and it's not just the client's intuition, but they're combining those things. The H is for helping them to explore all the options. So any good decision-making process is going to look at options and alternatives so that people are making an informed choice. The A stands for assess the patient's values and preferences. What are the things that are important to them? And I'm going to talk more about another way to assess this in a moment, but what are the things that make the most sense to them? These might be spiritual things, they might be mental or emotional things that are important to them, they might be physiological. The R is for reaching a decision. What is the thing that is going to be tried? And then the E is for evaluating that patient's decision. And that doesn't mean that the doctor is saying yes or no, you can or can't do that. They're evaluating the decision in light of all the information that had been shared and the client's preferences, but making sure that it's relevant to them, that it's likely to help with the condition from their medical perspective. Okay, so now we've got a patient model for making decisions, a provider model for making decisions, and yet there are still other influencers that we need to talk about. One of them has to do with data, specifically how data is presented. So again, our culture and kind of our modern minds, we really like to gravitate towards evidence, things being rational and logical. And most of that is given to us in terms of numbers. But how numbers are delivered can be very influencing. For example, if I were to say 5 out of 100 people experience these side effects, or if I were to say 1 out of 20 people experience these side effects, those numbers might mean different things, even though they're saying the same thing. How that is interpreted is based on what we can imagine in our minds. It is harder for the average person to think of 100 people in a room and then see 5 of them having some bad side effect. That number seems smaller, the crowd seems larger, it doesn't seem like such a big deal. But when I hear 1 out of 20, I can imagine 20 people in a room and one person. I can see all of them and I can see that one person having that bad thing happen. That number is often more impactful, even though it means the same. So for people who aren't quickly doing the math in their minds and don't realize that they're the same numbers, that can influence the decision they make. Similarly, we might hear something like, people who did this thing had twice the bad outcome. But what are the actual numbers? If the numbers are 1 out of 10,000 people had this one reaction, but if they did this thing you're considering, 2 out of 10,000 had this bad thing happen, literally that's twice as many people in the second scenario. But the sheer numbers are really, really small. That's 0.01 or 0.02%. So it's important that if you're helping people make decisions, that you help them understand what the numbers really mean. And then that moves us into a deeper level of understanding things, which is understanding how people interpret risk. Are they risk adverse or are they risk taking? So some people might look at 1 out of 10,000 and say, if it could happen to one person, I don't want to be that one person. I'll do everything to avoid that. And then there are those who say, like, 1 out of 10,000, those are pretty small odds. They approach life more with a life as a process kind of approach. They think of good things can happen and bad things can happen, and kind of let the chips fall where they may. So we want to find out where our clients are in that spectrum of risk avoidance to risk okay. Then there's a tool that's called the Groopman Spectrum. Jerome Groopman is a physician. He wrote a book called Your Medical Mind in 2011, and it was a book primarily for physicians, but a lot of lay people read it as well. It was a really good exploration into how medical decisions are made. And he came up with 3 more spectrums to look at. One has to do with people who are interested in natural medicine versus technology. So how interested are people in herbal medicine, acupuncture, meditation, exercise, diet, versus people who are interested in all the technology, the medications, the machines, the devices? Where people are on that scale is going to influence the kinds of interventions that they are open to. Then we have the minimalists to the maximalists. Minimalists are people, regardless of what the treatment is, are they interested in not trying any of the things? They want to kind of let nature take its course as much as possible, or do they want it all? And then we have the doubters versus the believers. The doubters are those who they don't trust the medical system, they don't trust doctors, they don't trust medication, they kind of don't trust a lot of things in life. And the believers are those who trust whatever the doctor says. They believe in the healthcare system, they believe in Western medicine, they believe the research that the pharmaceutical companies give them in TV ads. They believe kind of a lot of what they're given, and they don't need a lot of proof. So now you can start to see where people lie on these various spectrums and then pay attention to how they intersect. So somebody might believe in technology, but they're a minimalist. So they only want to do one technological intervention, the one that they think is going to be the most useful for them. Or they might be a maximalist. They want to do all the things, but they believe in natural medicine. So they want to do all the acupuncture, all the herbs, all the diets and exercises. There also might be people who are on the risk adverse scale. So they might like technology, but if there's risks involved, they're not as interested. And then they might believe in everything and anything, and they're okay with risk. So they might be willing to do all the things on all the spectrums because that's where they fall. And keep in mind that while these things are used for making medical decisions, how people are in life is often reflected in how they make medical decisions. So asking people that you're working with where they fall on these spectrums is a way to get a little bit more insight into how they're going to be when they have to make these kinds of choices. Okay, now I want to go even deeper. So in my very first blog, I talked about how humans learn and the impact of families on our early beliefs and values. And we learned about the rules and agreements that we make as children based on early experiences that we have, what we see, how we make sense of it. So one of the things I used to teach my students and my doula clients about is our first birth story. And that is our first memory of when we learned about birth and what did we learn. So for example, if somebody grew up on a hippie commune and everybody was having home births, their first birth experience might be, oh, when birth happens, the midwife comes and all the friends gather around and it's a celebration and there's lots of food and it's really fun. And somebody who remembers a sibling being born and lives in a conservative family in an urban setting, they might remember that when their baby brother was born, mom left and she was kind of rushed out the door. She didn't come back for 3 days. Aunt Martha, who I didn't like very much, she came and took care of me. She wouldn't let me go to the hospital to see my mom. I felt really isolated and curious and lonely. And then when my mom came back, she had this baby and everyone was taking care of the baby. So that child might form a belief around birth that birth is kind of scary and people go away and you're alone for days and then you lose love. And those might be their rules and agreements. Because what's important to remember is that people are making these ideas about things from their 5-year-old self or their 8-year-old self or their 3-year-old self. So whenever those first memories occur, that's the language that this rule and agreement is made from. And we factor those in, even if we're not conscious about them, into the adult decisions that we make. So you might have heard me use this reference. Who's driving the bus? Who's driving the decision-making bus? If I am factoring in my rules and agreements from my 5-year-old self, even though I've had experiences as an adult that have overlaid that early experience, maybe those experiences confirmed that yes, birth is scary. I may not use the same words. I may not say birth is scary and people go away and you lose love. I might say, birth is an ordeal and it's dangerous and people need to go to the hospital and then everybody kind of has to figure it out and it's really stressful. Or I might not say birth is really cool. The midwife comes over and all the friends come and it's a big celebration. I might think birth is normal and it's filled with love and people gather around and it should be done in community. So our adult experiences can add on top of those original childhood beliefs that we have. But what I want you to believe is that when people are making experiences around their births as adults, that child voice is in there on some level, helping them to make that decision, driving the decision-making bus. And as you can see, that would probably be helpful to know about. Okay. So once people have made decisions and then things happen, so they've had the medical procedure, they've had the birth, what does the aftermath look like? Well, if things didn't go as they planned, which never happens in birth, but if things didn't go at all like they liked them, there's a couple of different responses that people might have based on their stress coping skills, based on their resilience skills. Now, if people kind of were well prepared going into this, they had an appreciation for birth being unknown, and they felt like they had good support, no matter what happens, they will probably fare pretty well. But for people who really felt like things got out of control, they had no agency in this process whatsoever, they may do a number of things to kind of scramble. One of the things I've seen people do is what I call salvaging. They are taking all the things that were on their birth list of things that they hope to happen, and anything that is left, they're trying to salvage. If they wanted a home birth, if they wanted an unmedicated birth, if they wanted a vaginal birth, and none of those things are happening, what is left that they can try to hang on to? It might be that they want to hold their baby as soon as possible on their chest. It might be that they want to keep their placenta. It might be that they want there to be a moment of silence after their baby is born. Those things are going to be really important because it's going to represent that they at least have some control over what's happening in their birth experience. Then there are those who I call the oh fuck it's. They're the ones who say, oh, well, the first one or two things haven't happened on my list of birth preferences. So they throw out the entire list. It's not surrendering, it's like just throwing their hands up and giving it all away. They divest themselves of all autonomy and power, and they just hand it over to somebody else. And one of the things that I see is that these tend to be other coping skills from life. So if people are just they don't do well with change, they don't do well with not having their things go their way, they may not be able to cope with it and they just kind of like let it all go. Regardless of how people's experiences go and how they deal with it in the moment, the doula's role is really important in helping people to process and integrate their experiences. And we do that by talking with them well after the fact, when they've had a chance to get used to parenting, get used to having a new baby, and sit with that experience for a while until they're ready to talk about it. And when we can ask people, what was that like for you? What happened? What's your recollection? That can be an opportunity for them to say, wow, this is what it feels like now looking back. This is what it felt like then. And we can determine whether they have some really negative or maybe not even good recollections of what actually happened. So we always want to listen to the birthing person's experience of their birth without interruption, without being corrected, without any interpretation. Just let them tell their story. So we can ask them what happened, and then we can ask them, perhaps, what do you wish happened differently? It's a way to let them express, God damn it, I wish that didn't happen, or I wish this happened. We can validate that. Yeah, I know that was really hard. That was really unfortunate. I'm so sorry that you didn't have control over that thing. So we can validate that. And then we can find out, what did you learn from that experience? Because as anybody knows about the heroic journey, you go into the unknown, and then that often takes you into a dark place, takes you into the underworld where you don't have control. You have to let go of your idea of self, of the things you thought you'd never have to do. You might have to make some really hard decisions. But in that process, you learn about yourself. You develop some new insights, you develop some strengths, and then you carry them out of the underworld into the afterworld with you, and you present those as a new part of your new identity. So sometimes we can help people realize that you actually learned some really important lessons, some really good, insightful things about yourself that are become the new story of who you are. When we're able to help people do that, we can help prevent birth trauma. Decision making can be really hard. I hope that this episode has helped you get some more insights into how we can make good decisions, how we can help others make good decisions. Next week, I'm going to share with you the actual process that I used when working with clients to prepare them for birth. and the decisions that they might need to make, and also share some stories of what actually happened when we use those things in the births that I've attended in my career. So I hope you can join me next week. Thanks for watching today. Be well.